It is an absolutely gorgeous fall day here today. And thank goodness, because even though it is now November, I'm so far behind. I still have quite a bit of fall planting to do. Realize that cardboard looks like a broken window back there, but no, I just stuffed some cardboard back there to get it in out of the rain. There is still a lot happening in the greenhouse. I have a couple of pumpkins in here that I'm really hoping are going to ripen, but they don't look like they're turning, and I'm starting to lose hope a little bit. They are both Musc de Provence, which is what this one here is as well, and that one is pretty much fully ripe. I'm going to bring that in along with those butternut squash, and these are all sugar baby watermelons, so I've got to get those inside too. This tray of turmeric was supposed to be planted in the ground, but never did. It's been sitting in there for months. You know what? We actually have turmeric? Yes, we do. There is actually some turmeric growing in there. This greenhouse needs a full day of attention. There are cobwebs, there are rosemary cuttings. My lime actually produced some limes. Look at that. I don't know if they're going to get any bigger. I really need to bring this indoors. There are 3 beautiful little fruit down there and clusters of so many more that probably won't develop. And I actually have some succulent cuttings that have rooted that I think I'm going to bring those in, pot them up, and leave them in over winter. I haven't fully decided what I'm going to do with that yet, but that's what I'm thinking. And these are what we are going to plant today. I have 2 trays of snapdragons. They need a little water first, and a tray of Rudbeckia. And they're not very big, but at this point they're not supposed to be all that big. What we want is for them to overwinter as small little plants, get their roots in the ground, which might be pushing it this time of year. And then we want them to overwinter and grow and flower earlier next year. And this results in bigger, stronger plants and earlier flowering than if we had started these in the spring and then planted them out a little later. And I actually do have some things that I did get planted already. The first of them, in this bed, I noticed some self-seeded larkspur, and I did have a tray of larkspur seedlings, which I stuffed in the holes. So there should be quite a bit of larkspur in here. And the larger leaves are actually Chinese forget-me-nots. Now these I've never attempted to overwinter, but that's going to be an interesting experiment because there's a few that came up on their own. There's a much bigger one over there, and then there's a small one right here. But not only do I have a few in this bed, but I have a full bed over next to the driveway of plants that just came up from seeds that were dropped from my spring planting. So those also just self-seeded themselves, and I didn't need that bed, so I left it to its own devices, and we'll see what happens with that in the spring. Everything else is coming out little by little. I'm pretty far behind, but I've been working my way over clearing these rows one at a time, and I'm pretty sure I can get it all done before the ground freezes. I also have this bed that is full of feverfew. Some of this is on its 2nd year, and some seedlings were planted this spring, and I even scattered a little bit of seed in the empty spots because I know it self-seeds pretty well. This is the bed of Rudbeckia that I've been toying with over the last couple of years. I've been taking out the plants that I don't like as much, popping in a couple more, and I'm going to leave this for one more season until I completely flip this bed to something else, hopefully to put all my Rudbeckia into my perennial beds where they can live in a permanent spot. But some of these plants are really nice and healthy, and they were still flowering too up until the frost hit them. Most of the larkspur that I seeded in trays, I ended up putting here in the back of the new garden, actually. So there is a row at the back that's going to come up and start to bloom as the daffodils fade, probably well after the daffodils fade. This Veronica will die back to the ground. I grew that from seed this year too. There are also about 300, I think, maybe 200 tulips planted in this bare spot over here. And I had a gap over here where I planted a bunch of Sweet William. So that's going to fill out really nicely in the spring. This garden is mostly planted for spring, and then if it fades, I'm just going to seed a bunch of annuals in here until I think of a more permanent solution. I do have Sweet William in a couple more places. The rest of my seedlings went here, and there is a full bed of much more mature Sweet William in the back that I actually grew from seed this spring, but it didn't flower because I got it in too late. So we're hopefully this will overwinter, even though it's quite mature, and flower in the spring. Now, in the middle of the front yard, this is where I planted my tulips. There are close to 2,000, I think, tulips planted in these 2 trenches, and the rest of this space here is bare. There's a few perennials up near the front. You can tell I grow a lot of lavender. I have just 1 small sage plant here, but I'm going to be taking cuttings from that next year. I also have quite a bit of sea holly, and some of it is blooming a little bit late. I got a lot of big tall stems off of this year, and it's blooming a little bit, but we have had multiple frosts and everything is slowing down. Those are the boxes that I had my tulip bulbs in. I just broke them down and left them here because I was running late, but I'm going to be using those underneath some mulch for weed control. But the rest of this space here is completely bare, and this is where we're going to plant our snapdragons and our Rudbeckia. So we've got Rudbeckia. I'm just changing my plan, and I'm going to put the snapdragons first. And I would normally do a couple of rows really close together. I'm second guessing that now only because we've been dealing with a lot of weed pressure here. I'm just noticing now a lot of larkspur seedlings coming up right in this area too. And I had larkspur planted here this year that definitely went to seed. So that's a bit of a bonus, and I'm going to leave those here. They are barely up. I don't know if that's mature enough to survive, but that's just another garden experiment that we'll wait on for next year. Now, I've never actually successfully overwintered snapdragons. I never get the timing right. And it doesn't help that our fall weather is incredibly different from year to year. It's been incredibly warm so far. We had frost, and then the temperatures went right back up again, and they're going to do so again this week, which is why I'm planting these now. It might be a little chilly today, but the next 3 days are all going to be significantly warmer, not just during the day, but overnight as well. And that is the key. I really like these to settle in a little bit before experiencing a frost. And they have been in the greenhouse with the door wide open overnight, so they are accustomed to cool temperatures, probably even frost temperatures overnight. And the most important factor here is that the ground is actually still a little bit warm. So it's the roots that are much more important at this point than the top growth anyway. So we are starting with Chantilly Bronze, and then, oh, I have Apple Blossom, which is going to be lovely. I think I am going to do a double row. I have room for that without disturbing all of these larkspur. Starting with Chantilly Bronze. Now these are all seed that I bought in the spring and never planted. So knowing what can overwinter in your area, and this doesn't just have to be for selling flowers, this can really give a good start if you're just a home gardener too. Now I am putting these fairly close together because they're going to get cut, and these really tall ones are going to get pinched too. But if we get a mild next couple of weeks, these will very likely root in and be just fine. Most of these are really good root systems, and I'm having to work around the root systems of the zinnias that were here over the summer because I cut them off at the base and left the roots in the ground. And that is for 2 main reasons. The first is that it controls erosion. We can sometimes get a lot of heavy rains in the fall and spring, and that helps prevent soil from washing away, which can happen very easily. And it also contributes to the organic matter of the soil. It's basically akin to digging in compost. If you leave the roots in the soil, then that will break down and add organic matter into the soil, not just at the surface level, but much deeper down, which is saving you a lot of work, saving you having to make the compost and then dig it in. And a lot of these snapdragons are multi-sown also, which means there are more than one, there's more than one seedling in each cell, sometimes 2 or 3. Oh, and sometimes they're branching from the bottom and it isn't actually more than one plant. But I do have a few in here that are 2 to 3 plants each, and that gives you a little bit of insurance because if a weaker one dies off, then there's more of a chance that you're still going to have a plant in that space next year. So I did not thin these, and snapdragon seeds are so tiny, it's almost impossible to place just one anyway. And because these seeds were on the older side, I wasn't sure if they would all germinate, but the germination was great, and hopefully that will work out well and give me a nice healthy stand of snapdragons early next season, finally. All right, so I finished the snapdragons, and that should be a good amount of plants to get me started on the season next year. And what I can also do is put hoops over these to force them even earlier, which is what I might do. And this is a completely different spot for my spring planting this year. I've got my tulips, and those will come out pretty quick, so anything else that's fairly hardy that I start in the spring, I can then put in that spot once the tulips come out. So I have two varieties of Rudbeckia. I have Sahara, and then I have Gloriosa Daisy. I had seen that called Double Daisy, but that just said Gloriosa Daisy. So I think I'm going to put the Sahara up top because it's shorter. And what I notice with Rudbeckia mixes is that there is a wide variety of flower shapes and colors and sizes, especially in the Sahara, as well as heights. So what I did in my original planting, which is 2 years old now, is I started this year pulling out the plants that I didn't want. I gave some away and keeping the ones that I want. So that's what I'm going to do with these. I'm going to seed a whole bunch more in the spring, and I'm going to start keeping and dividing the colors that I want and then weeding out the ones that I don't, which means starting a whole bunch more plants than I actually need to make sure I can actually make use of them this year. Now the last thing I do after I plant these is I will come through and water them. If I had watered them before planting, I wouldn't. But two things, these seedlings are pretty dry, and we've had a bit of a drought. We haven't had any significant rain in well over a month. We got a light rain the other day, but not really much to make any difference. So I suspect I'm gonna run out of space here. I'm gonna finish these Sahara, and then I might have to make a whole other row for the Double Daisy. I think the spacing is actually going to be perfect. And I put the Rudbeckia here on purpose because Rudbeckia can actually handle poor soil. And the soil in this particular corner was not all that great this year, so I know I have some work to do. Can't forget to tag it. This is the Gloriosa Double Daisy. These are pretty nice, healthy plants though, so they should hopefully root in well. I'll give them a good water, and then they'll overwinter and we'll get some good blooms early on in the spring, and that'll be a really good start to the season. And with that job done, I think the only thing I have left to plant is about 300 daffodils. So that's not too bad. It's a little emptier in the greenhouse now. Those things definitely have to come in. And my poor amaryllis. But this greenhouse is gonna get a big clean out before winter. I've got to power wash the inside. I think it's a little late to put a coat of paint, but I can do that again next spring. Thanks so much for watching.